So we're going to start with Mrs. Sinnett. So would you please introduce yourself to our audience and give us what your role as a superintendent is for this district?
Okay, I'm Wendy Sinnett, Superintendent of Lafayette Unified School District, and I guess you could equate the role somewhat to the CEO of a corporation. It's to ensure that our students are receiving the best possible education possible, to oversee the hiring, recruitment, and retention of the best possible teaching staff. I work with a wonderful cabinet. We have an assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction. Mr. Evans is our chief business and operations officer. We have an assistant superintendent of human resources. And then we have directors over special ed, over technology, over assessment, and then our site leadership, the principals, associate, and assistant principals at all the school sites. So it's working with the organization as a whole, working with our constituents who are our parents, our students, our community, really making sure that sort of the school is the district is really tied to the fabric of the community so that we're all in sync to serve the needs of our kids.
Great. And Mr. Evans, would you do the same?
Yeah, my name is Mark Evans. I'm the Chief Business and Operations Officer. So my role in the school district is kind of everything that's not the curricular side. When people think of schools, they forget, there's still an electric bill. There's all those operations you need to do with the custodial services, the food services, risk management, and all things like that. So that's what I oversee now.
Right. So going off that, we all know that the school district needs to spend money on infrastructure as well as staff. So how does the district kind of delineate where these assets are going to be applied?
Well, there are the ongoing costs we have, like staff, which are going to recur every year. And then there are single expenditures. Painting the high school last year was a single one-time expenditure. We're looking to redo the turf at the field at the high school. That's a one-time expenditure. In the last few years with the state budget, they've given out the ongoing monies. They've trying to build us back up to where we were in 07, 08. So some of those are ongoing. And then they've given us what they call one-time monies. And those aren't going to come back next year. If the economy's good, we might get something. The new projections show that we might get a little one-time money again in the upcoming year. But those are hard to put in the long-term budget because they will eventually exhaust themselves. So when we're looking at some of those capital expenditures, we're trying to use those one-time monies in those capacities so that they can be spent, be done, and they don't have to come back again next year. Or it's a new project next year.
So ongoing dollars tend to go for things like salaries. They go for things that will recur. One-time monies, we're trying to target where the needs are most highly identified and apply those one-time dollars to those needs.
So would the football field or the paint job at the school, would those be examples of those one-time monies expenditures?
Yes.
Yeah, we had a large amount of one-time monies in the 15-16 budget, and a good chunk of that going towards the football field.
So as a follow-up question, how do you answer to parents and teachers who are confused by the appropriation of parcel tax monies to assets such as the football field and paint job, or those actually from the state?
The parcel tax, when it was voted on, had very specific parameters for what it should be, and there's an oversight committee that we check in with twice a year, and they actually report out to the board at the end of the fiscal year in May, just before the fiscal year completes, saying yes, that's where the monies were spent. And we code those monies specifically so we can say they're going to the class size reduction or whatever objectives were set out by the parcel tax. Much the same way a bond, when you pass a bond, is for building certain things. We check to make sure, are we using those monies as the election said they were to be used.
And you don't really have a lot of range. The parcel tax language determines where those dollars can be spent. And the oversight committee is responsible to the board, and the board is responsible to the community, because each parcel in the community generates those tax dollars, and so they have to be targeted for the explicit language that was in the measure.
So just as a clarifying question, that money from the parcel tax couldn't have been spent on teacher salaries?
Well, part of the parcel tax language is related to instructional program and to class sizes and and then all that relates to teachers. And so we have many of those dollars tied to actual positions, to deliver programs and to also ensure that the pay is competitive.
Right. One of the parcel tax objectives was lower class sizes. So that means more teachers because they're distributed differently. And so, yeah, there are parcel tax revenues that go towards salaries and benefits and all. So there are ongoing costs. And we consider the parcel tax an ongoing revenue source,
Right.
but it actually has a lifespan. It will end in 2021.
Yes. And so when you build up all of those programs that are tied to positions and they're part of your operating budget, and you have a 2021 cut date, unless your voters are willing to re-up, that's something that keeps the CBO awake at night.
With regard to the salaries, how concerned are you both about teacher retention with this round of negotiations?
Well, I mean, I'm very concerned. I mean, we reviewed, I mean, we were avid viewers of your last interview. And when you hear that teachers are requesting letters of recommendation, that's a huge concern. It's a concern because teachers are the people on the front lines. They're delivering instruction. And when you have teachers who are well known by students, beloved by students, delivering quality instruction, you want to retain those teachers. And you have to do that within the parameters of the budget. So it's that balancing the competing needs. How can we move salaries? How can we move the dial on salaries and still maintain fiscal solvency? Because ultimately the board won't approve a contract where the bottom line isn't met, because the board's job is governance and stewardship. And when we had the fiscal crisis in 07-08, we didn't ever have to have furlough days. We didn't have to do layoffs. There weren't cuts. We had to not fund certain things for a while, but we didn't have to cut things. And so that fiscal stewardship is part of the board's hallmark, and they're going to protect that because that's why they were voted into office.
And I think another challenge for budgeting is people look at this year, and I actually have to look multiple years out. And well, the numbers look good this year due to inflation and increasing pension costs and all. It eats very quickly into the bottom line. So looking out multiple years, sustainability is really important, because to give something and then have to take it back or find cuts to compensate for it is more painful. So what can we do to put something there that we can make sure we can keep there?
And the other thing that Mr. Evans just mentioned, and the state is trying to return us to our purchasing power of 07-08 with this new funding model. The sound bites in the nightly news look really good, because it sounds like there's all this money going to schools. And what's really the whole goal of LCFF is to return to the purchasing power of 07-08, and so we're operating from a deficit model from the get-go.
It's well known that you're well thought of as an administrator and as a superintendent, but does it concern you when people talk about your pay specifically with relation to these teacher pay negotiations?
Well, it's never a comfortable issue. And so when it was a topic of your last interview, it was something that if you asked me about it, I wanted to address. And I have to just reference, because he did so as well, Mr. Carroll and I have a very, very positive personal, professional relationship. We met yesterday, and he said, talk to the lens. And so this is all something that there's ways, even when there's tension or there's conflict in an organization, or people are coming together to try to assess, what are the facts, what are the realities. The way to do that is through information, collaboration, and dialogue. So I think that we can constantly reframe this in a really powerful and positive way. But part of that is, getting some common understanding. So when there are sound bites that say things like, my compensation went up 50%. I think it's nobody wants to talk about their salary, but as a public figure, you have to have that level of transparency. So I became superintendent in 2011. I have a contract that'll go through 2018. In that scope of 7 years, my compensation will go up 21.5%. So that's an annual increase of just under 3.1. If you want to talk about comps, which we do at the table, from 2012-13, 13-14, and 14-15, all members, every employee in the district received a 10% increase. So you take that 10% off that 21.5, and you're looking at about 11.5%. On most of our bargaining units' pay schedules, there are things called steps, and annually, for most teachers, you can sometimes plateau and not receive a step increase, but an annual step increase is about 1.5%. When you do the math on my salary, it puts it at 1.6, so I'm a little ahead of that. But so if you look at the averages, they're comparable. And I just think that part of the dangerous component of sound bites that talk about a superintendent receiving a 50% increase when that's not the case is that, well, like I said before, we're really dependent on our local revenues. We're dependent on our foundation, on our boosters, on our PTAs. And if those things are, if those statements are taken out of context, or make the public feel that it's true, then what you have is people may elect not to give. They might, see that, well, if the superintendent is receiving a 50% increase, then, they're doing fine and I don't have to give. And then we would reduce our donation revenue, and that would cut programs and cut salaries. And so that's a dangerous place to go. And so I'm very, very appreciative of my contract. I'm very grateful to the governing board. They've restructured my salary, and so that's where Mr. Carroll, he wasn't giving false information. It just wasn't the full picture. There's, not to belabor this too much, but most superintendents aren't paid this way, and it's a base salary, it's a merit pay, and then there are allowances. There's no retirement benefit to the merit pay or to the allowances. And so what the board has done is they've taken the same pot of money and they've shifted it to base pay. And so when you shift it to base pay, you could say, yes, the base is going up, but the total amount isn't going up. And so there isn't an increase in what's budgeted for the total salary.
I think along those lines, the districts that are very comparable to us are similar. They have only a base grant and very little supplemental dollars based on students of high need. So they rely a great deal on Ed Foundation's parcel taxes. When we look at our comps, they have very similar type of revenue streams locally. And when you have a large community involvement, I think that stewardship of the budget is even more important, because so many of your dollars come right from town. And I think people are paying more attention because they're more engaged and involved. And that's what makes the district strong, too.
Would you clarify, when teachers and other individuals circulate these documents that show our pay scales in comparison to other districts, is that public perception that we're that far off from other districts accurate?
I don't think we're that far off. I mean, Mark is more in the reads on all of this than I think anybody, but we do county analyses, and for LA County, we're in the top quartile in terms of being competitive. And you can say, well, we're so high performing. Well, that's true, and we really value that. But part of it is that when you do comparisons, the teachers in all of this county, they're facing the same cost of living, they're facing similar life choices, and so we think that it's a good soundbite. Then we have our local comps, and you're talking about school districts like Manhattan Beach and South Pasadena and San Marino, and I think it's fair to say that at the entry level, we're very competitive, so that that's a good recruitment tool. We also give full credit to anybody coming to us. So for most districts, if you enter with anything more than 10 years, they're only going to give you 7 to 10 years of credit on the salary schedule. We'll take full years, all the way up to 25. And so that's a good recruitment feature. Retention. We try to look at some sort of the total comp benefits. Our benefit package is very competitive. You also have things like the board has made it a priority for us to accept under the permit process the children of any of our employees. And so there's an educational piece that if you come and work for our district, your children can be educated in La Cañada. And I think that's a benefit. We always want to be as competitive as possible, and there are areas on the salary schedule where we're behind and we need to gain some traction, but it's not outrageous. I mean, it's within the county ballpark, and then when you get to our local comps, it depends on step, column, and cell.
Yeah.
So the main issue is with teachers with long tenures and the 20 plus years.
Yeah, and those teachers who have given, their careers to us, we really want to compensate them. But we have a majority of our teachers who are on the bottom left-hand part of the salary schedule, and for some of them, it gets static. You're not getting the annual step increases, and everybody was hit by the recession, and the last 3 years we've given a 2%, a 4%, and a 4%, and that 10% matches the industry standard. But if our local districts that we're comparing to have a higher base and they're giving the same, you're just moving along and not gaining some ground.
I think, and you look in multiple universes. In the universe of LA County, we're very competitive. And I think on the recruitment front, we're very competitive. In the universe of our comps, which are small, high-performing, single high school districts is what we tend to look at. We are not as competitive at the bottom. It's actually the bottom right side of the scale. But we also have over half of our staff are in those columns on the far right. So that makes our salary schedule weighted towards that side. So even though we have a broad range of salary schedule, we tend to be paying on the bottom right, more expensive side, so there's less to go around. And that's where you start going into the deeper numbers. Where are the other districts? Where are their employees scattered across? And then, as I mentioned earlier, the local resources. What are those local resources? Because for our competitors, we're really looking at the local and what is their parcel tax, what does their ad foundation give, and stuff like that. And we're pretty competitive there. But it varies and depends on how many students you're dividing that between and all as well. So it gets to be, lots of arithmetic.
Yeah. So there are a lot of long tenure teachers, and that kind of dilutes the amount of money that could be allotted to give them another step increase.
Yes. So,
accurate?
if people were distributed more evenly across there, you wouldn't have as many on that bottom right. And that's a good thing. We have experienced teachers. But it doesn't make us competitive in that corner as much.
Okay, so what are some of the ideas that the district has to possibly create more discretionary funding for teacher pay?
Well, I don't think we can create more discretionary funding because I think that basically the budget is what it is. There's these, set pool of dollars, and we have budget assumptions. And so I think what it is to look at, okay, where are the new, there is some new funding. There's some new base grant dollars. There is new one-time monies, but like Mark said, those one-time monies can't really be used for salaries because they don't recur, and salaries do, reoccur every year. So basically, I think the bargaining team, and we talked a little bit offline about interest-based bargaining, and I think that the whole idea of interest-based bargaining is both sides come and you identify common interests, you identify common options, you bring in data on industry standards. You have to look at sellability. The association has to sell whatever's agreed upon to their members. We have to be able to, it's not really sell, but explain it to the board and get board, consent and approval. So part of it is the teams doing the deep dive into the budget and to say, okay, these are the constraints. Do some outside the box thinking. Be very aware of what their interests are and sort of, what our constraints are is that, as much as this board and this administration wants to pay the teachers and as well as possible and to, move towards the increases that we're hearing, them advocate for, you've got to have a budget where this year and 2 years out, meet a bottom line that's fiscally solvent.
Yeah. And I think checking in on what are those priorities, where are those dollars being spent, and are those where we want to spend them? And that's not just the district, the teachers, and teachers want new carpet in the classroom when it's worn out. They want the technology, but their salary is an interest too, and it's a finite amount of resources. I think effectively using those one-time dollars so they can go to things that are short-term or one-time expenditures, that's another way we can take some pressure off the general fund. And then looking down the road on how do we improve our revenues or reprioritize them. We're looking at doing a study of our facilities master plan and what are we going to need in capital expenditures. Then maybe we need to do something bigger than just a savings account each year for that. Which when I was looking at solar, we didn't go forward on that because there were some things that led us not to do that at this point in time. But that's a great way to, if I can lower my electric bill, I put more money back into the general fund.
And I think we have to do some long-term visioning because there isn't an immediate fix. And if you look at San Marino, and I know our assistant soup of HR was talking to their assistant soup because they had a long-range plan that got them to where they are now. So I think we have to have a plan that looks forward and isn't so just determined in the immediate. Because if we do these the board's given direction for us to do a facilities master plan. That means we'll go to each site and we'll talk about what are the needs, what are the priorities, and we'll get community buy-in. And if we develop that, and the board is willing to look at making a decision about a potential bond measure in November of 2017, if that comes to fruition, then there are. That would be a new revenue stream into the budget that would deal with facilities. And some of the dollars that have been directed to facilities now would then, you sort of shift the deck chairs, and then those dollars would be freed up to, look at sort of long-term salaries. And so it is that I think we have to maintain the relationships. We have to understand that the interests are common, that we want a high-performing school district. We want to meet the needs of our students. We want to have a 21st century world-class education. During our interview, we had somebody accepted to Art Center. We want our kids to go to the best possible schools. And to do that, they need to be supported by world-class educators. And to keep and attract and retain those world-class educators, we've got to be having our eye on the prize of salary. That's a given, but it's being measured in your approach and making sure that all of the other competing needs are met and addressed.
So a bond issue is a likely result of all this.
It'll depend. The board's given the green light to do the facilities master plan, and then we need to sort of test the pulse of the community. It was only a couple of years ago that we passed a parcel tax. In the life of this parcel tax, we'd be looking at a potential bond. We have to make sure that that's done well because in 2021, we want to renew that parcel tax. And it's all about balancing the transparency, the communication, and the accountability to your stakeholders, because if you fall down in any time and people start to not see good management, there'll be questions, and and those funding sources that we're so reliant upon will dry up.
All right. So this is our last question, but what points would both of you emphasize from your angle that haven't been really emphasized publicly?
You want to go first?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I think that we want to move forward and improve our salaries and retention as well, but we want to do that in a responsible way that will not have a backlash down the road on program or on people. Every time we negotiate, we have to fill out documents. It's a form called the AB 1200, and we have to sign off, and it's my name on the document that says that we are able to meet these obligations for 3 years. So that's really important to me, that we are able to meet those obligations for 3 years. So I think one of the interests I have as the greatest common interest is that we maintain our good certification financially in the multi-year outlook, not just in the immediate year.
Yeah, I think my the thing that I want to keep present in people's minds is all of the positives, all of the powerful assets that we have. We have amazing kids. We have an extremely supportive parent population. We have a preeminent, high quality, world class teaching association, and our CSEA, our classified staff is excellent too. Our administrators are very, very dedicated, and we're going to have conflict, and when you have conflict or when you have those competing needs, the tendencies can be that people shrink back, or people force, or people stop talking. And really what the most powerful response is to give good information and to collaborate. Our governing board is very altruistic. They're very committed to positive governance and stewardship, and they're pro-teacher. And so I think if we look at all of those dynamics, and we sort of commit to the principles of interest-based bargaining, where you're arguing positions and not people, and you're focusing on common interests, and you're thinking about a range of options, and you're winnowing those options, and you're trying to figure out, okay, do these meet industry standards, and are they sustainable, and what's down the road. I think that visioning together is really powerful. I think if we get positional, it will be damaging, and I really don't want our community to go down that road.
Well, thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.